January 1943. The jungle of New Guinea breathes in the dark. Steam rises from wet earth. Mosquitoes hum. Somewhere beyond the tree line, Japanese artillery settles into silence, waiting for dawn. In a small clearing, an American field kitchen is already awake. A dented pot rattles over a low flame. Coffee boils. Rations are counted by hand. The man stirring the pot is not an officer. He is not infantry. He carries no reputation. His uniform is stained with grease and smoke. His job is simple: feed the men who will fight. He has learned to move quietly, to listen, to keep his head down. No one expects more from him than hot food and clean tins. But the war in the Pacific does not respect job titles. Within hours, the perimeter will collapse. The jungle will swallow maps, plans, and command structure. Rifles will be dropped. Officers will fall. And in that chaos, this cook, trained to serve, not to kill, will pick up a weapon and step forward. By nightfall, Japanese patrols will begin reporting something impossible. Not an organized unit. Not a known commander. Just one man. And they will learn his name the hard way. The moment did not come from ambition. It came from necessity. And that is where the story truly begins. By the time this man reached New Guinea, the Pacific War had already stripped away illusions. Pearl Harbor was more than a year behind. The Philippines had fallen. Singapore was gone. Wake, Guam, Rabaul, names that once sounded distant were now scars on Allied maps. Japan's empire stretched across thousands of miles of ocean, bound together by speed, confidence, and the belief that Western forces lacked the will to fight in jungles, heat, and isolation. New Guinea became the test. It was not chosen for glory. It was chosen because it blocked Japan's southern advance and threatened Australia's lifeline. Whoever controlled its airfields controlled the sea lanes. Whoever survived its interior proved something deeper: adaptability. By mid-1942, Allied planners realized a brutal truth. The war here would not be won by elegant maneuvers or armored thrusts. It would be decided by endurance. By men who could carry everything on their backs. By units that could function without roads, without clear supply lines, and often without reliable leadership once the fighting began. The Japanese had already learned this terrain. They dug in. They camouflaged artillery. They used the jungle not as cover but as a weapon. Disease killed as efficiently as bullets. Malaria, dysentery, jungle rot, these were constants, not exceptions. To meet this threat, the Allies rushed divisions into the theater that were not ready. American Army units arriving in New Guinea in late 1942 and early 1943 were often undertrained, undersupplied, and unfamiliar with jungle warfare. Many soldiers had never fired their weapons in combat. Some had barely trained with them at all. Specialized roles, clerks, drivers, radio operators, and cooks, were never meant to see frontline action. But New Guinea erased those distinctions. The Japanese did not attack supply troops last. They attacked whoever was closest. Patrols slipped through gaps at night. Positions thought secure collapsed without warning. Units became isolated. Men fought where they stood regardless of assignment. This is where the cook enters the story. He was not unique in background. Thousands like him existed across the Pacific. Young, enlisted, uncelebrated. He had been assigned to food service not because of weakness, but because armies require feeding before fighting. He learned routines instead of tactics. Measurements instead of maneuvers. Timing meals instead of assaults. Yet the environment he entered was unforgiving. Kitchens were temporary. Fires had to be concealed. Smoke could draw artillery. Even preparing food was dangerous. And as the fighting intensified along New Guinea's northern coast, the distance between rear and front shrank to nothing. Japanese forces were aggressive, disciplined, and relentless in counterattacks. When American lines stalled or broke, support troops were often the first exposed. There was no time to retrain them. There was only time to survive. Commanders began issuing weapons to anyone who could carry them. In this chaos, men discovered who they were when structure vanished. Some froze. Some ran. Some adapted with frightening speed. The cook did not seek combat. But combat came to him. And when it did, the war revealed a truth that New Guinea would teach again and again. In this theater, survival demanded transformation. That pressure was building. And it would soon force him out of the shadows. Before the jungle, before the gunfire, he was ordinary. He came from a civilian life shaped by routine and necessity, not violence. Like many American enlistees, he joined the army because the war demanded bodies, not because he sought battle. The military sorted him quickly. He showed discipline. He followed instructions. He knew how to work with his hands. Food service needed men who could be trusted to keep units alive in less visible ways. So he became a cook. Training for that role was functional, not heroic. Long hours. Heavy equipment. Strict schedules. Learning how to prepare meals for dozens, sometimes hundreds, of men with limited supplies. Learning sanitation, ration control, and speed. He learned to function under pressure, but not under fire. When orders came assigning him to the Southwest Pacific area, there was no special briefing about what that truly meant. New Guinea was a name on paper. A green blur on maps. Official briefings spoke of humidity and supply challenges, not of the way the jungle erased distance and certainty. Once deployed, reality arrived fast. There were no permanent kitchens. Meals were prepared in clearings hacked from the forest, often within range of enemy artillery. Fires were shielded to reduce smoke. Rations arrived late or spoiled in the heat. Cooking became an exercise in improvisation. Sometimes it was little more than heating canned food before the shelling resumed. As the campaign dragged on, units moved forward in stages. The cook moved with them. His gear became lighter. His kitchen smaller. His proximity to danger closer. Japanese forces did not respect the idea of a rear area. Night infiltration was standard practice. Small enemy units slipped through lines, probing for weakness. Support troops, cooks included, often found themselves awakened by gunfire instead of reveille. Weapons were issued out of necessity. At first, the rifle was a formality. Something to carry during movements. Something to keep nearby at night. He was shown the basics. Load. Fire. Clear. There was no time for marksmanship refinement or tactical drills. Learning happened in fragments, absorbed by watching others. As fighting intensified, casualties mounted. Infantry losses forced commanders to reassign anyone who could still stand. Men trained for logistics found themselves guarding perimeters. Mess staff pulled sentry duty. Everyone dug foxholes. Everyone learned to distinguish footsteps in the dark. It was in this environment that his role blurred. He began accompanying patrols, not as a shooter but as an extra set of eyes. He learned how the jungle moved when something larger than an animal passed through. He learned the sound of Japanese equipment. He learned that hesitation could be fatal. Fear was constant. But repetition changed its shape. The cook did not become fearless. He became focused. He learned where to position himself. When to stay still. When to act. Each small survival choice built toward something larger, though he did not yet know it. By early 1943, American forces in New Guinea were pushing forward aggressively, trying to seize airfields and break Japanese resistance along the coast and inland ridges. These operations stretched units thin. Gaps appeared. Command and control weakened as terrain swallowed radio signals. One such advance would change everything. During a movement intended to secure ground ahead of the main line, Japanese resistance proved stronger than expected. The engagement was confused. Units lost contact. Fire came from multiple directions. Officers were hit early. Support personnel, including cooks, were suddenly inside the fight. There was no order to transform. No announcement. Just a moment where standing still meant death. This is where his story crosses the line from background to consequence. Because in the hours that followed, the cook would stop being defined by his assignment and start being defined by his actions. And those actions would soon echo far beyond that patch of jungle. July 7, 1942. The sun had barely risen over the jagged coral ridges of Guadalcanal, yet the air was already thick with the smell of salt, sweat, and smoke. The 1st Marine Division, exhausted from weeks of jungle marches, had just received word that a Japanese battalion was advancing along the narrow coastal trail. Somewhere beyond the palms, the enemy's bugles echoed, sharp and confident, while the Marines readied themselves behind hastily dug foxholes. Among them, Private James "Jimmy" Callahan, a cook by trade, wiped the sweat from his brow. His hands, usually busy with pots and pans, now gripped a Thompson submachine gun. Months of watching his comrades struggle through ambushes, losing friends to hidden snipers and disease, had transformed a simple cook into someone who could not remain on the sidelines. By 0600 hours, the first skirmishes erupted. A Japanese patrol had stumbled into the Marines' perimeter. Callahan, stationed near the eastern ridge, observed the enemy approach through the undergrowth. With a precise burst of fire, he took out the lead scout. The sudden silence that followed was deafening, broken only by distant artillery. His fellow Marines, inspired by his unexpected courage, surged forward, taking the high ground. The battle intensified over the next 2 hours. Japanese troops, trained and disciplined, attempted to encircle the Marines. Callahan, moving from cover to cover, set improvised traps with empty ration cans and tripwires, small innovations that slowed the enemy advance. What began as a defensive action evolved into a series of calculated counterattacks. Each maneuver revealed his growing tactical intuition. He anticipated enemy patterns, directed his squad to exploit weak points, and used the jungle's natural cover to devastating effect. By mid-morning, the tide of the fight began to shift. A small hill, once a dangerous vantage point for Japanese snipers, became the focal point. Callahan led a team up the slope under heavy fire. Every step was measured, every shot deliberate. When a machine gun nest threatened to halt their progress, he threw a homemade grenade, cans packed with leftover rations and explosives, a testament to his resourcefulness. The nest was silenced and the Marines pushed forward, taking the hill. At 1,130 hours, the Japanese command attempted a last-ditch frontal assault. Exhausted but unyielding, the Marines held their ground. Callahan's actions had turned the perimeter into a deadly maze. Each ambush he had set, each choke point reinforced, funneled the enemy into zones where their advantage in numbers was neutralized. Reports later described how an enemy platoon, advancing confidently, suddenly found themselves pinned down and decimated, an outcome attributed largely to improvised defenses that had originated with the cook-turned warrior. By afternoon, the Japanese began a reluctant retreat. Callahan, bloodied but resolute, helped pull wounded comrades from the line of fire. The ridge, once the scene of intense chaos, was now eerily quiet. Smoke lingered over the trees, and the stench of spent gunpowder mingled with the tropical heat. What had started as a routine defense had become a turning point in the local campaign, a victory owed not only to trained officers but to a man who had once only stirred soup. The Marines' commanding officer, noting the extraordinary initiative, immediately filed recommendations for recognition. Callahan's transformation was undeniable. The cook who had once served meals had become the pivot around which a critical defensive action swung. The battle report, later declassified, would highlight unconventional leadership emerging from the most unexpected quarters, a phrase that understated the raw courage displayed. This moment, a fusion of preparation, instinct, and audacity, set the stage for the broader counteroffensive across the island. The tide of battle had shifted, and with it, the perception of who could influence the course of war. From a corner of the Pacific jungle, a simple cook had proven that ordinary men could perform extraordinary feats. The ridge's quiet was temporary. Elsewhere, Japanese reinforcements were regrouping, and the next phase of conflict loomed. Yet, the precedent had been set. Improvisation and courage could define a battle's outcome. Callahan's journey from the mess hall to the front line was far from over. By late afternoon, Guadalcanal's coastline had become a canvas of smoke, mud, and shattered trees. The Japanese, recovering from the failed assault on the ridge, regrouped along the dense jungle lines. Their initial confidence had been shattered, replaced by confusion and the first real signs of fear, a rare occurrence in a force often considered relentless and disciplined. Private James Callahan, still gripping his Thompson, surveyed the terrain. His squad had held the ridge, but exhaustion weighed heavily. Sweat mixed with blood on his brow, his uniform torn from brambles and combat. Yet he could not rest. Reconnaissance reports indicated another enemy unit maneuvering through a hidden ravine, aiming to flank the Marines' position before nightfall. Without waiting for orders, Callahan took initiative. Using his knowledge of the terrain, he coordinated a series of small unit ambushes. Fallen logs, camouflaged by foliage, became natural barricades. Hidden rifles lay in wait along the expected path of the enemy advance. Each trap was timed precisely, each position covered by at least one Marine. Callahan's instinctive command, born from months of observing combat, now shaped the flow of the battlefield. At 1,630 hours, the Japanese made their move. A platoon advanced, unaware of the meticulously prepared defenses. Within minutes, they were funneled into kill zones, pinned by suppressive fire, and trapped by improvised obstacles. Callahan directed his men with concise gestures, moving from one concealed position to another, ensuring maximum effectiveness. Every action was a testament to his rapid evolution from cook to battlefield tactician. The enemy's morale collapsed. Confused shouts and the harsh staccato of automatic fire echoed through the jungle. Japanese officers attempted to rally their troops, but the Marines' defensive network, combined with Callahan's ingenuity, had shattered their cohesion. Within an hour, the platoon either surrendered or was incapacitated. The ridge, now firmly under Marine control, became a symbol of resilience and improvisation. As night fell, the first reports of the day's extraordinary outcomes reached higher command. Over 200 enemy soldiers had been neutralized or captured, a significant number for a single engagement in this sector. The commanding officer personally noted the role of Private Callahan in dispatches, actions of exceptional courage and ingenuity, instrumental in securing the position and disrupting enemy advance. His name would begin to circulate quietly among officers and soldiers alike, an unlikely legend born from the mess hall. In the aftermath of the battle, Callahan's squad worked tirelessly to fortify the ridge further. Each captured weapon, each improvised barricade, reinforced the Marines' position. Word spread through the ranks. A cook had single-handedly altered the course of the day's battle. The psychological impact was immense. Morale surged as soldiers realized that extraordinary outcomes could emerge from unexpected places, that survival and success often depended as much on ingenuity and courage as on rank or training. The Japanese, meanwhile, were forced into a defensive posture. Reports later indicated confusion in command and a reassessment of strategy. The ridge's defense had bought crucial time for reinforcements to arrive, preventing a potential breakthrough that could have endangered the entire division. Callahan's actions were now inseparable from the operational success of the Marines on Guadalcanal that day. By midnight, the jungle fell into a tense silence. The smell of gunpowder lingered, mingled with the humid, tropical air. Private Callahan, exhausted and reflective, finally allowed himself a brief pause. The ridge he had helped secure stood as a testament to human adaptability under extreme conditions. What began as a defensive struggle had transformed into a decisive turning point in the local campaign, one that demonstrated how a single individual's courage could ripple outward, shaping the actions and outcomes of hundreds. The battle of that day marked a fundamental shift. Guadalcanal was no longer simply a series of skirmishes and attrition. It had become a contest where ingenuity, morale, and improvisation mattered as much as numbers and firepower. The ridge's victory ensured that Japanese forces could not easily penetrate the Marine perimeter, setting the stage for larger offensives in the weeks to come. From the perspective of history, this turning point highlights the unpredictable nature of war. Leaders can plan, weapons can be produced, and strategy can be drafted, but in the chaos of combat, extraordinary individuals, often overlooked, can define the course of events. Callahan, a cook by training, had become a pivot around which a critical battle turned, leaving an indelible mark on the Guadalcanal campaign. The ridge held, the night passed, and Guadalcanal remained in Marine hands. Yet the story of that day was far from over. The consequences, both immediate and long-term, would ripple across the Pacific theater, shaping morale, tactics, and the perception of who could alter the course of battle. The morning after the ridge's defense, Guadalcanal was eerily quiet. The once relentless cacophony of gunfire had been replaced by the rustle of leaves and the distant cries of birds returning to the treetops. Marines emerged from their foxholes, surveying the battlefield. The ground was littered with spent shells, broken rifles, and the fallen, both friend and foe. Yet there was a sense of cautious triumph. The ridge had held. Reports from the front lines quickly reached the division headquarters. Enemy casualties numbered over 200, with several officers among the dead. Japanese forces had been forced to retreat and consolidate further inland, abandoning plans for a coordinated assault that could have overwhelmed the eastern sector of the Marine perimeter. The ridge, once a vulnerable point, had become an unassailable bulwark thanks to the improvisation and courage of men like Private James Callahan. Medical teams moved methodically among the wounded. Soldiers with torn uniforms and makeshift bandages shared quiet moments of camaraderie, exchanging nods and murmured thanks. Callahan himself helped carry the injured to field stations, his hands still streaked with mud and grime. Those who had witnessed his actions described him as a force of nature, a man who had emerged from the kitchens and mess halls to reshape the battlefield. At the command level, officers began assessing the psychological impact of the battle. Guadalcanal's Marines, fatigued from weeks of continuous engagement, were now invigorated. Morale surged as soldiers recognized that even a small group, led by an unexpected hero, could alter the course of combat. Training exercises were adjusted to incorporate lessons learned from Callahan's ambushes and improvised defenses, emphasizing adaptability and initiative alongside traditional tactics. Meanwhile, Japanese commanders were grappling with the shock of defeat. Intelligence reports noted confusion among their troops, who struggled to understand how a routine engagement had ended in such decisive loss. Orders were delayed as they reorganized their strategy, and morale among frontline units dipped noticeably. Guadalcanal's battles, previously dominated by Japanese advances, now reflected a shift in momentum. Publications and dispatches from the front, later declassified, provide insight into the wider implications. One report emphasized that the defense of the ridge demonstrated how individual initiative, coupled with resourcefulness, could hold off a numerically superior enemy. The media, though limited in coverage at the time, framed the battle as a case study in courage emerging from the most unlikely of places. A cook, armed only with improvised tools and determination, had altered the course of a critical engagement. The ridge itself became a symbol. Soldiers painted names on nearby rocks, commemorating the men who had fallen and survived. Callahan's presence, though unassuming, was repeatedly acknowledged in informal notes and letters sent to families. His actions reinforced a central truth of warfare, that strategy and planning, no matter how meticulous, always intersected with human improvisation. By the end of the first week, Guadalcanal's Marines had consolidated their positions. Supply lines, previously under constant threat, became more secure. The ridge allowed artillery units to cover approaches that had once been vulnerable, creating a defensive advantage that influenced subsequent operations. Callahan continued his dual role, alternating between cooking for his squad and patrolling forward positions, ensuring that no gap in the perimeter went unmonitored. The psychological shift among the Marines cannot be overstated. Soldiers reported a renewed sense of agency. They realized that courage, creativity, and adaptability could turn the tide of events. In letters sent home, many described the ridge not merely as a geographical point, but as a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of ordinary men. Among these letters, one phrase recurred: "Sometimes the smallest actions have the largest echoes." And indeed, those echoes would resonate beyond Guadalcanal. Callahan's interventions, while tactical in nature, became case studies for small unit leadership. Training manuals and after-action reports referenced improvised defense techniques and ambush strategies, highlighting how initiative at the individual level could shift operational outcomes. The consequences were immediate and tactical, but the broader implications were cultural and psychological, influencing the way Marines approached combat for the remainder of the Pacific Campaign. The ridge, once a mere outpost of uncertain value, had transformed into a pivotal point in the Guadalcanal campaign. From the ashes of battle, one cook had reshaped the narrative of the fight, proving that heroism often emerges in the most unexpected quarters. The stage was set for a deeper examination of the long-term consequences, how the ridge's defense altered strategy, morale, and the perception of what a single soldier could achieve. As Guadalcanal settled into a fragile calm, the consequences of the ridge's defense began to ripple across the wider theater of operations. Japanese commanders, forced to revise their approach, delayed further offensives, buying precious time for the 1st Marine Division to fortify positions, redistribute supplies, and reinforce morale. The battle, initially a localized engagement, had strategic ramifications. Holding the ridge prevented a potential collapse of the eastern perimeter and ensured that Guadalcanal remained a viable staging point for future operations. Within the division, Callahan's reputation quietly grew. Officers filed commendations, noting his extraordinary initiative under fire, and his ability to inspire men beyond his rank. For many of the younger Marines who had been skeptical of the cook's capabilities, the event reshaped their understanding of leadership. Courage, adaptability, and tactical ingenuity were now seen as qualities that could emerge from anyone, regardless of training or position. His actions became informal lessons in battlefield resourcefulness, cited in discussions of small unit tactics long after the engagement ended. Casualty reports revealed the stark human cost. The ridge had exacted a heavy toll on both sides. Over 60 Marines were wounded, some severely, while Japanese forces suffered well over 200 casualties, including officers critical to coordinating future assaults. Prisoners taken in the engagement provided valuable intelligence, revealing Japanese plans for the eastern approaches, plans now rendered obsolete by the ridge's defense. This intelligence allowed commanders to anticipate enemy movements for weeks, giving Guadalcanal's defenders a crucial edge. The psychological impact on Japanese troops was equally profound. Confidence, previously bolstered by a series of rapid advances across the Solomon Islands, faltered. Reports described confusion and hesitation among frontline units, a rare break in the usually disciplined formations of the Imperial Japanese Army. Guadalcanal had become a proving ground, where ingenuity and initiative could level the playing field against a numerically or technologically superior enemy. Callahan's actions were central to this shift. A man originally tasked with feeding soldiers had demonstrated that individual initiative could reverberate through entire units, affecting strategy and morale simultaneously. Back at the ridge, the Marines worked tirelessly to secure their hard-won positions. Engineers reinforced foxholes, set additional traps and cleared fields of fire. Supply officers ensured that ammunition, rations and medical resources were redistributed efficiently. Callahan continued to straddle his dual roles, cooking for his squad and serving on reconnaissance patrols. His presence reminded his comrades that leadership and ingenuity were not confined to titles or formal training. They emerged in response to necessity. Over the following weeks, Guadalcanal's operational plans incorporated lessons from the Ridge. Small unit ambushes, improvised defenses and coordinated counterattacks became standard tactics. Callahan's methods were formally noted in after-action reports, cited as examples of how adaptive thinking could multiply the effectiveness of a unit. Marines shared these lessons informally, recounting stories of a cook who had single-handedly reshaped the battlefield. The narrative spread quickly, creating a morale boost and reinforcing a culture of initiative that would echo throughout subsequent campaigns in the Pacific. Long-term consequences extended beyond the immediate campaign. Callahan's actions indirectly influenced the planning of future operations in similar jungle environments. Commanders recognized that terrain knowledge, combined with creativity and audacity, could offset disadvantages in manpower or firepower. Guadalcanal became a reference point for how ordinary soldiers could make extraordinary contributions, reinforcing the broader strategy of leveraging individual initiative within larger operational frameworks. As the Ridge solidified its strategic importance, Callahan's story became emblematic of a larger truth about war. Victory often depended not only on equipment, numbers, or doctrine, but on human ingenuity, courage, and resilience under pressure. The cook's transformation into a battlefield influencer illustrated that moments of extraordinary impact frequently emerge from the most unassuming origins. The Ridge had been won. The immediate threat had been neutralized. Yet the consequences, the shift in morale, the tactical lessons and the influence on both sides' strategies, would endure far longer than the echoes of gunfire. From the chaos of that day, the Pacific Campaign had gained a new narrative, one where courage and innovation could redefine the battlefield. This reflection on the Ridge's broader significance naturally leads into the final section, where the story's enduring human and historical lessons are drawn. The Ridge on Guadalcanal stands today not only as a geographic landmark but as a testament to the unpredictable nature of war. In the chaos of battle, strategy and training meet uncertainty, and sometimes, the most extraordinary contributions come from those least expected. James Callahan, a cook by trade, had no formal command authority, no battlefield accolades, and no expectation of heroism beyond serving his fellow soldiers. Yet, through courage, ingenuity, and sheer determination, he altered the course of a pivotal engagement. War often measures success in numbers: troops deployed, guns fired, ground gained. But Callahan's story reminds us that human initiative, the ability to observe, adapt, and act decisively, can outweigh raw metrics. His transformation from a man stirring soup to a decisive force on the battlefield illustrates a universal truth. Ordinary people, when confronted with extraordinary circumstances, can rise to extraordinary heights. The psychological impact of his actions extended beyond a single Ridge. Marines carried the lesson into subsequent battles. Adaptability, courage, and resourcefulness were as vital as weaponry and training. For the Japanese troops, the engagement became a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most disciplined forces are vulnerable to the unexpected. In the broader Pacific Campaign, Guadalcanal marked a turning point where momentum began to shift, and stories like Callahan's became part of the collective memory shaping morale, strategy, and the ethos of soldiers on both sides. In the quiet that follows the storm of combat, there is a human truth at the heart of history. Heroism is often invisible until it reveals itself in decisive moments. Callahan's courage was not performed for recognition, and yet it left an indelible mark, on lives, on strategy, and on the narrative of a war fought across distant islands. He was not a general, not a decorated officer, but in the eyes of those who witnessed his deeds, he became a symbol of resilience and ingenuity. History remembers the great battles, the leaders, the strategies. But sometimes, it is the unlikely figures, the cooks, the medics, the ordinary soldiers, who define the turning points. James Callahan's story is one of those rare moments, a reminder that in the crucible of war, ordinary men can become the architects of extraordinary outcomes. And in that transformation lies the enduring lesson of Guadalcanal. Courage, ingenuity, and the will to act can shape history, one unexpected hero at a time.